Congratulations, the HSC trials are all done. You've just made it through one of the hardest parts of Year 12, and now you may be wondering, what's next? Do you take a break? Do you dive right back into past papers? And how do you actually improve in time for the HSC? In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what to do after trials, how to set up a smart revision plan, how to improve with your feedback, and how to ultimately maximize your ATAR. The tips that I'll be sharing in this video are what I followed when I was in your shoes this time a year ago, and they ultimately helped me attain a 98.8 ATAR and the ducks of my school. Let's get right into it. First things first, after trials, definitely have a proper break. The HSC trials are honestly the busiest and hardest part of Year 12, even more so than the actual HSC, so you definitely deserve some time to recover. For around 2 weeks, just focus on completing your classwork while you're at school and any small bits of homework that you get given by your teachers. There's no need to get right back into your study routine or start hitting the past papers right away. Now, once September rolls around and you begin to get your trial papers back, that's when it's time to gradually get back into your studying. Now, once you get your trial papers back, it's important to not just look at the mark, but to look at why you got that mark. It's easy to just look at the number and not even open up the paper because it could be slightly traumatizing if it was a hard exam, but the true learning and true growth happens when you reflect on your mistakes and understand what you can do to prevent that in the future. For most schools, trials make up 30% of your internal mark, which in the end accounts for 15% of your ATAR. The actual HSC exams at the end of the year account for 50% of your ATAR, so just think of the trials as a dress rehearsal for the real thing. Even if your results weren't exactly what you hoped for, there is still so much time to improve, and your final marks scale up so much. The best way to use the feedback from your trial papers is to start a mistakes book if you don't have one yet already. Go through each of your trial papers subject by subject and write down any questions that you got wrong, the feedback, why you lost marks, and how you can improve. This becomes your personalized revision guide, almost like a roadmap to studying for the HSC. As you do this, you'll want to separate all your mistakes from your trials into two categories: content gaps and exam technique. Mistakes due to content gaps are when you didn't know or couldn't recall the information in the exam. You may have forgotten the steps of a scientific process, blanked on a historical date, or forgotten your quotes for your English essay. It really happens to everyone. However, these content gaps are the best starting point for your revision. They show you exactly what your weak areas of the syllabus are and where you need to study to really boost up your overall mark. I'd recommend going back to your class notes, a reliable online resource, or even asking your teacher on what this concept is and how you can understand it better. You can then create your new findings into a flashcard and write it in your mistakes book so you know exactly what content you need to remember for the actual HSC. Once you've brushed up on the content that you weren't so comfortable with in the trials, it's now time to reattempt the questions that you lost marks on. Knowing the content is one thing, but being able to actually apply it into an exam scenario is what most students find the hardest. I'd recommend rewriting this question and handing it back into your teacher and seeing how you go a second time around. And I'm sure that your teachers would be more than happy to help, as it shows that you're being really proactive in your study approach for the HSC. Once you get that question right, or as close to full marks as you'd like, you can then write that question into your mistakes book so you can see the original mistake you made, the content you need to brush up on, and now a full mark response so that you don't make that same mistake again. For example, in English Advanced, in my trials, I scored the lowest in Module A. Instead of ignoring this and pushing it to the side, I continued to rewrite my module essay and hand it back into my teacher until it was in a Band 6 range. This helped me improve so much, and this was ultimately the essay that I brought into the HSC, and it helped me feel so much more confident knowing that I had already received feedback on it. The second category of mistakes fall under exam technique. Mistakes under this category are when you knew the content but just didn't know how to answer the question properly. Common examples are not addressing the ness of verb properly, running out of time, or missing key parts in the question by not reading it properly. While these mistakes can feel frustrating, the good news is that they're really easy to fix with some strategy and technique. The most common exam technique mistake is most likely not properly addressing the NSW verb, and I know that this is something that I found challenging too. For example, if an exam question states that you have to compare something, you have to show similarities and differences between the two things that you're comparing. I remember in my biology trial, we had a compare question, but I mind blanked in the exam and only mentioned the differences between the two things and forgot to mention a similarity, resulting in the loss of marks. However, learning this in my trial saved me easy marks later because I ended up making a flashcard deck of all the NSW verbs and tested myself on these the night before an exam. That way, when I had the actual biology exam in the HSC, I didn't make that same mistake and remembered super clearly to include that similarity as well. If you still feel a little unsure on your NSW verbs, I'd really recommend creating a flashcard deck on them. Many people have already made decks on Quizlet if that's handy for you, or you can make your own. If timing and not being able to finish the paper or finish enough questions in the time limit was an issue for you, I'd recommend treating studying like training for a marathon. You can't expect to perform your best on exam day without strategy and practice. In terms of strategy, a good rule of thumb is to divide the marks in the paper by the time. For example, the biology exam is 3 hours, which is 180 minutes with 100 marks, leaving you about 1.8 minutes per mark. I roughly equate this to 2 minutes per mark for short answer, as the multiple choice questions don't often take you that long. This way, you'll pace yourself evenly across the paper, ensuring that your marks are evenly distributed and you're not putting all your energy into the start of the paper and leaving an extended response barely touched at the end. Later in your HSC study time, once it gets to the school holidays and the actual HSC exam period, I'd recommend that you'd schedule some time in to do full practice papers. Yes, the whole 2 to 3 hours without any interruptions, so that you can get used to the pacing. I'm sure that you would have found during trials that it can sometimes be hard to focus for the whole 2 to 3 hours, and sometimes your brain gets a bit foggy. But the good news is that the more that you do this and the more that you train, the more you get better at it for the real thing. Finally, if your issue was misreading the question or forgetting to include examples, I'd recommend that you set yourself a consistent answering routine. Every time that you get to an exam question, spend a couple seconds to underline the verb, circle any key terms, and quickly jot down your examples in small handwriting before you get into the response, because it can be easy to lose your train of thought. This gives you some structure and stability to make sure that you stay on track. So, once you've reflected on your trial papers, how you can improve your content gaps and any exam technique mistakes, it's now time to actually get into the revision. But the big question is, what do I actually revise? The best place to start is with your mistakes book, but don't leave it at that. The exams only covered a small portion of what's actually in the syllabus for all of your subjects, so on top of your mistakes book, I'd recommend going through your syllabus for every subject and highlighting any key points that you know you would have lost marks on if you got asked that question. Now it's time to use this as your roadmap for the rest of your revision. For the final few weeks of Year 12, I do not recommend you to go overboard with your studying and overwhelming yourself with massive study sessions every afternoon. Rather, I'd recommend that you set yourself one solid, focused revision task per afternoon. This one revision task per day that you select is going to be based on your weakest areas in the syllabus and in any mistakes that you made in your trials. For example, here's what my revision looked like when I was in Year 12. I scheduled in one task per afternoon based on where I needed to improve after trials and where I knew my syllabus knowledge was lacking. I also spent more afternoons on the subjects that I found hardest, which was English Advanced, and spent fewer afternoons on the subjects I felt strongest in, such as PDHP and Food Technology. Personally, I handed in almost everything I did in these afternoons, whether it was rewriting English essays, writing PDHP extended responses, or attempting biology short answer questions. That extra one-on-one feedback from teachers made such a difference because it's like I sat the trials again and was receiving feedback, which I could further write in my mistakes book, refine, schedule study, and continue the process. And notice how I'm not suggesting that you get right into the past papers again straight away. If you get right into past papers too early, you're just going to repeat your same mistakes if you haven't spent the time to patch up your weak spots. Once you've spent a few weeks patching up those weak areas, doing your targeted, focused revision, and seeking teacher feedback, it's time to get into past papers around the time after graduation. At that stage, once it gets to the school holidays, the process becomes pretty straightforward. Complete a past paper, reflect on your mistakes, do targeted questions based on the mistakes, and do another past paper. and you just repeat the process. I'll be making a whole other video once it gets to the time on how I studied for the HSC during the school holidays, but that's just the basic structure. But for now, just remember that trials are not the end. I know that they're the biggest exams you've done so far, and if you didn't get the results that you hoped for, it seems like the end of the world. But the good news is that there's still 50% of your ATAR that you haven't even unlocked yet. By giving yourself a break, reflecting on your papers using a mistakes book, tightening up your exam technique, refining your weaker areas in your content knowledge, and seeking continual feedback, you're setting yourself up to walk into the HSC confident and ready to do your very best. I really hope that this video was able to help you in any way, and if it did, please feel free to like and subscribe for more videos like this, especially heading into the HSC season. I hope you all have an amazing rest of Year 12, and I'm wishing you all the very best in all that you do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.